Hello, and welcome back to France Made Simple, the podcast where I demystify life in France and debunk some of the many myths that seem to surround living here. So today we're talking healthcare and in particular top up or additional insurance, or what is known in France as a mutuelle. Now, this is a private insurance, but it's nothing like private insurance in the UK or the USA in terms of what it provides, or indeed, perhaps even more importantly, the cost. But listen on, and I will reveal more. So, almost everybody moving to France needs to become affiliated to the French healthcare system, which is administered by the Sécurité Sociale, which is commonly referred to as le Sécu. Now, the first thing you'll need to do is gain an attestation de droit, a statement of your entitlement to healthcare, and then the famous green carte vitale. Now, this is the physical card which you produce when consulting healthcare professionals. There is now an app which probably is designed to do away with the card, but the app doesn't always work, so you will still be using your card. Now, getting this card is no mean feat, but once that's achieved, and we'll be covering that in another podcast, I think I have done already. Excuse me, maybe I need to see a healthcare professional. We have done already, but it's good to go over again. But once you've got your carte vitale, you need to think about choosing top-up health cover, and this is where the fun really starts. It was something that took me a long time to get my head around, so I'm going to try and explain it as simply as possible. So a top-up healthcare insurance policy is generally referred to as a mutuelle. And how useful it is and how, important it is can be quite complicated for foreigners to grasp because, as I said earlier, it works nothing like having private healthcare in the UK. And this is why some people, when they move to France, they assume they don't need a mutuelle because they already have a carte vitale and they believe that is sufficient. And the answer to that is kind of, well, yes, it is, and no, it isn't. Now, obviously, the choice is ultimately entirely down to the individual. But according to official French statistics, only 5% of French people do not have top-up cover. So it's worth looking at exactly how the system works and understanding it before you make that decision, whether to have or not have a mutuelle. Now, the most important point to understand is that French healthcare cover works on an index, which is known as the BRSS, the Barème de Remboursement de la Sécurité Sociale. And this basically translates into meaning that the refund or remboursement of each type of medical visit has its own percentage. So, for example, if you go to the GP, you will be charged €30, and some of this will be refunded by the Sécu and some of it won't. If you go and see a gynecologist, it's €35. Now, this is if they are what's known as conventionné, which means they've signed up to a convention saying that their charges won't be above a certain level. So, going back to the GP or your médecin traitant, the health insurance system, part of the Sécu, the assurance maladie, will refund €21, leaving you €9 out of pocket. Now, this is only a small amount of money, so people often assume they're better off not paying for a top-up policy and meeting the additional costs themselves. However, although you're refunded whether you go public or private, the prices charged in the private sector are not the same, and most consultants operate in the private sector. Now, this means that should you need to consult a cardiologist, even if you're sent via your GP, the consultation fee may well be around €70 to €90, if not more. And the BRSS is only €55. Now, this could leave you with between €15 and €35 to pay. Equally, if you are transported to hospital and you end up in a private clinic rather than a hospital, there will be additional charges. And this also explains why the lower end of top-up insurance policies tend to only offer 100% cover for specialist specialist consultations. Now, this figure sounds good because you would think 100% means 100%, but it actually leaves the policyholder with a shortfall to be met out of their own pocket. So this is also why policies which offer 150 to 200% are a much better bet for those who might require specialist consultations. Now, at this point, it seems easy to argue that if you're in good health, that should suffice and that you don't need the extra cover. However, there's always a however, isn't there? Any accident or illness that results in you being hospitalised can result in hefty charges, and with the reimbursement percentages being quite variable, for example, a consultation with an anaesthetist is refunded at 60 to 80%. It's entirely possible to find yourself facing a very large bill. And, a bill that will run into several hundreds, if not several thousands of euros. In addition to all that, without a mutual, the hospital can legally ask for your stay there and the charges to be paid in full and upfront, whereas with top-up insurance, the hospital will invoice the insurers directly. So, if you have a huge savings pot and you're prepared to take that gamble and you can front the money if you need to, that's okay. Doesn't work for me because I'm quite risk averse. Now, the entry level and thus the cheapest mutuals, therefore, often offer hospitalisation only cover. This means they meet 100% of the surgical and medical charges, but they won't cover the sort of it's around 20 euros, I think, currently, daily charge, known as the forfait journalier, which is applied after the first 24 hours. And they won't pay for any extras such as a private room, TV, internet access, or a bed if you want to stay with your child or partner or whatever. And again, these charges, although they can only be a few euros a day, if it's a longer stay, they can soon add up. And I saw this when my father-in-law was hospitalised in France after suffering an aneurysm, and the daily charge he was in for several weeks and it was several hundred euros and had to be paid by him before he could leave the hospital. Now, then there are pharmacy charges, which are refunded at a rate between 15 and 100%, depending on the type and the cost of the medicine prescribed, unless, of course, your doctor has very helpfully prescribed a non-refundable product, which happens more often than you might think. However, in this case, if you have a more comprehensive top-up policies, they may well cover the cost anyway, or at least a decent proportion of it. Now, orthodontics, dentistry and glasses are other sectors of healthcare which are notorious for being under-refunded by the Sécu. Things are changing. For example, dentists are now required to provide crowns which are refunded at 100%, thus meaning that the patient is left with zero to pay. However, I do like that word, however. I spoke to Fabien Pellissier from Fab French Insurance, who is an insurance guru, better than an expert even. He is a guru, and he specialises in the British market and the USA expats in France market, and the generally English speakers in France market. Anyway, Fabien pointed out to me that although it may seem like you should have nothing to pay, in reality, it's up to your dentist to provide you with a quote that is 100% refunded. And as you can imagine, most of the time, those quotes are based on lower grade materials, such as metal crowns, for example, which is not ideal for most of us. It might be all right depending where it is in your mouth, but, aesthetically, not great. So he also pointed out that, let's be honest, with less than 300% cover from your mutuelle, you will not get much in the case of dentistry, despite the alleged 100% santé cover. So that is something to think about. Now, glasses are also expensive here. Most French mutuelle policies include glasses as part of the package, but that inclusion does inflate the premium, and you can only claim for one new pair of prescription glasses every 2 years. So it may well be worth checking the price of glasses before deciding to include them on your policy, even if you're a glasses wearer. Do I need to get into laser treatment at this stage? No, let's stick to glasses. So it may be cheaper to buy online, and that will bring your premium down, especially as removing cover for glasses doesn't remove the cover for ophthalmologist visits. So you can still go and get an eye test to see what correction level you require. And I know many people return to the UK to actually purchase their glasses or even buy them online or buy via a cheap outlet like what's they called, lunettes pour tous, which, you know, with your prescription, they will custom make your glasses and post them to you. So if you've decided, like 95% of French people, that you need a mutuelle, how on earth do you go about choosing a provider, let alone a policy, from the hundreds of firms competing for your business? Now, if you're employed in France, you will be in the position of having one provided by your employer. And whilst these do vary in terms of their coverage, and some are definitely better or worse than others, and you do have to contribute towards this, it will be deducted from your salary. These policies almost invariably provide quite good value for money, if not very good value for money, and will give you fairly extensive benefits for relatively very small cost. But again, as I said, they're not always great, so do read the small print. However, the majority of people, so in other words, the self-employed like myself and retirees, will need to arrange their own cover. Sorry, just having a little coffee break here. That's better. Right. So if you understand the percentage refund rates and you can work out your own needs as both an individual and a family, you can try looking at a comparison site, which is what I used to do. We'll come back to that later as well. So if you do this, you need to think about your health cover requirements as well as those of your family, plus your finances and your attitude to risk. As I said earlier, I'm quite risk averse. And with 3 children, I felt we needed good mutuelle coverage. Because, for example, if you have children, they're very likely to need orthodontic treatment. And the state will reimburse, I think it's currently about €193 something per semester for a maximum of 6 semesters. Now, my experience is that orthodontic treatment invariably goes on beyond those 6 semesters. And the average cost is between €600 and €1,200 per semester. And as I said, it frequently goes on beyond that. So this can prove to be a massive financial outlay for families. So in this situation, it makes complete sense to go for a policy that has really strong coverage for orthodontics, like absolute maximum cover. And you may even get a policy which offers you an annual fixed fee payment for the years which fall outside the 6-semester period. This is what we had, and it covered pretty much everything. The policy wasn't the cheapest available, but it meant that I wasn't out of pocket for the kids' orthodontics. Equally, if you're a retired couple whose only dental requirements are general maintenance and your teeth are in pretty good shape, then you can go for a policy with a much lower level of cover. I mentioned before laser treatment, and I think it's well worth looking at policies which offer extra benefits. Many of them do offer quite a selection of additional benefits. And I had my eyes lasered a couple of years ago and received about a third of the cost back from the mutuelle, which was quite a large sum. Now, these extra benefits could include things such as home help in the case of you being incapacitated, and what they call médecin douce, which is stuff like osteopathy, smoking cessation assistance, contraceptives. I don't think anything covers reflexology or anything that's just relaxing, but physiotherapy, osteo visits, that kind of stuff will generally be covered if you've got a decent policy. But given that people's individual requirements do vary so much, I think using an independent broker who's not tied to any one company is generally a much easier and better way to proceed than trying to work it all out for yourself. And I'll tell you why at the end. It also means that you end up with personalised cover that is absolutely right for your individual situation. And you're almost certainly going to get better cover for the same, if not less, financial outlay. Plus, you have the reassurance of somebody being able to deal with the claims for you should the need arise. Or, even if the company is being slow in paying, which can happen, if you've gone via a broker, they will help them they will help you chase it up. So the points to remember here, I think, here are that the French Social Security doesn't refund 100% of their own index. The rate varies, but most of the time it's around the 70% mark, and your mutuelle compensates you for the missing 30% or a portion thereof. So you can decide to gamble and pay the 30% yourself, or you can get a mutuelle and make sure that you are covered in the case of any eventuality. Now, once you have a mutuelle, you also need to make sure your claims are automatically processed and refunded, and this is known as télétransmission. You need an attestation de droit from the Social Security to benefit from this, and this means that your mutuelle information is sent automatically alongside that from the carte vitale when you hand your carte vitale over, whether it's in the chemist, the pharmacy, or at the doctor's, and then you have nothing to pay and nothing to deal with, and it makes life a whole lot simpler. And we are all about making life in France as simple as possible. So I said I would explain why I recommend using a broker, and also why I recommend Fabian from Fab French Insurance. And it's because well over 10 years ago, I was filling in a comparison thing online to get better mutuelle cover for me, my husband, my 3 children, who all needed a selection of braces, glasses, and suffered from general aches and pains. That's me and the husband, not the children. Anyway, I filled it in and I thought I'd found a fairly good policy, and I was about to go ahead with that, and I got a phone call, a cold call. And not entirely cold because I had filled my phone number in. And normally I give very short shrift to people who phone me up and try to sell me anything. But Fabian phoned me, and within a couple of minutes had obviously got my English accent, started speaking to me in English, telling me about his experience living and working in the UK, was so charming, polite and helpful that I didn't put the phone down as I normally do. I said that yes, we could set up a meeting to look at my mutuelle cover. He came to the house, found me a policy which was around the same price, although very slightly less than the one I'd found, but had the most amazing cover. I ended up almost actually in profit several years running for the amount that we got refunded. It was brilliant policy. I unfortunately cancelled that one when I then got a job and got my employer's one, but then I went back to Fabian and now have an equally brilliant policy through him. So that was, I think, 12 years ago. I got chatting to him about the website. We started working together. And as we say, the rest is history. He now provides insurance to almost everybody that speaks English and lives in France. His client base is huge. Everybody is delighted with the level of customer service. It's Anglo-Saxon type of customer service. None of the French, c'est pas possible, c'est normal, c'est comme ça. I highly, highly recommend his services. 12 years on, I have all of my insurance policies with Fabian and Fab French Insurers, who are also the sponsors of this show. So thank you very much, Fab French Insurance. And if you need a mutuelle or want a better deal on your mutuelle or have any questions on your mutuelle, do go to Fab French Insurance, easy to find online, fill in a questionnaire and they will help you get a better deal. Anyway, I hope that's been a useful overview of how mutuelles work in France. And, hopefully once you've got one, you won't need to claim too much because you'll be in rude good health as a result of living a wonderful French lifestyle. But if not, it's good to know that it's there when you need it. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.